Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
Tonight's broadcast is brought to you by a longtime supporter of the Thinking Atheist website and radio show, evolvefish.com. Gary and Becky and Gavin and all the folks at evolvefish.com, terrific people doing terrific things. They're helping you share your message with the world with a variety of different products that bear different types of messages. Emblems and jewelry, magnets, buttons, stickers, literature, posters, a whole lot more. They've got t-shirts like the one I saw on the homepage that says, I tie Nye. And of course, it's about Bill Nye, the science guy, big bow tie on it. And it's especially relevant in the wake of Bill Nye's debate with Ken Ham. They've got the Hitch Slap stickers with Hitch's face on them. The bumper sticker that says Fox News, the more you watch, the less you know. Big poster that says a hate-free zone. Jewelry, bracelets, pendants, bearing everything from the atheist A symbol to the flying spaghetti monster himself, to the Darwin fish, to the peace symbol. There's just too much stuff to describe here, so check out the site and tell them I sent you. evolvefish.com. Share your message with the world at evolvefish.com. All over the world today, news headlines talking about the death of Fred Phelps. Well, Nathen Phelps, his estranged son, we know Nate's work as a human rights advocate and an LGBT advocate and just the antithesis of what his father has been. And Nate had posted on social media pages several days ago about his father's condition and sort of the tragedy of the whole situation, Fred's life and his death. And 2 days ago, on the 18th of March, I had the opportunity to have a conversation with Nate Phelps about all of this. Now, granted, we were speaking while his father was still in hospice in critical condition. So when you hear this conversation, we are talking about Fred Phelps in the present tense. He, at that point, was still alive. And it was a fascinating and interesting and kind of a compelling conversation from this father's son, this guy who had broken out of Westboro and now is going through probably a tremendous amount of conflict as his father passes away. So here it is, the conversation that took place just 2 days ago on March the 18th, 2014, between myself and Nate Phelps. In the Los Angeles Times, in an article dated March 17th by Matt Pierce, said this: Fred Phelps Sr., the 84-year-old founder of one of the most hated churches in America and possibly the world, has been placed in hospice and could be, quote, at the edge of death, according to an estranged son. The lack of public sorrow over this news has been frequent and unapologetic for reasons obvious to anyone who's been forced to pay attention to Phelps and the legacy he is expected to leave behind. Since 1991, under Phelps' direction, the Topeka, Kansas-based Westboro Baptist Church has held anti-gay demonstrations that would eventually include picketing the funerals of soldiers and praying for the death of more, with church members holding up signs saying, God hates fags. God may forgive Fred Phelps Sr., but society doesn't have to, read the headline of a Kansas City Star editorial. It will be difficult to forget the legacy of Fred Phelps Sr. Some people will do exactly as their God commands and forgive Phelps for his wayward behavior. Others won't, and for good reasons. Over at Salon, Mary Elizabeth Williams added, there's a saying that goes, live your life so the Westboro Baptist Church will want to picket your funeral. But when the time comes, who will be there for Fred Phelps? The answer, it turns out, might be nobody. An article in USA Today dated March the 18th says reports that Fred Phelps, 84, the founder of the Topeka Church known for its anti-gay message and protest of military funerals, is on his deathbed, has some looking forward to the Westboro Baptist Church pastor's passing. In fact, there are Facebook pages popping up everywhere, stuff like Fred Phelps Death Watch, with comments like this page, 1 like equals 1 death prayer for Fred Phelps. I really want to piss on his casket in the grave. Rot in hell, Fred Phelps, where you belong. And I hope he dies a slow, painful death. Well, all of this fervor started with a social media post by Nathen Phelps himself. Nathen, of course, escaped Wesboro at the age of 18. He is now an atheist. Nathen Phelps joins me for the broadcast tonight, and it's great to have him. Nate, so glad you're here.
It's my pleasure, Seth.
So, how you doing? I mean, I know you and your father aren't connected in any real way, but, you know, he is your father. And the fact that you guys aren't really communicating doesn't make this easy for you, does it?
Well, no, it doesn't. I got to say, I was actually surprised that there were any emotions when I heard the news. Still a little confused about what exactly they are, but there's been a lot of conversations, a lot of communication, like you were saying, that people are getting their thoughts out there, and they're pretty strong.
How does that make you feel when you hear stuff like that, when you read stuff like that? You know, I'd like to go to Wesboro and take a special detour to go piss on his grave, that kind of stuff. You think it's cathartic for people? You think it's a healthy expression of kind of the hurt that they feel, the hurt that Fred Phelps has caused them? Or does it hurt you when you see this kind of stuff, or both?
I would say primarily I get it. I mean, I understand why people feel the way they feel. It's one of the reasons why I decided to talk about it and put it out there in the public, because my attitude is that in spite of this is my family and this is a difficult time for those who care about him, he chose this path and he decided to be a public figure, and he decided to be a notorious figure. And I think those people that he's harmed have the right to have this information. So I expect that people are going to feel that way.
I'm guilty. You know, I'm not going to shed any tears for Fred Phelps. The guy's made no positive contributions to humanity. He's given us only pain and hate and venom and just ugliness. At the same time, if we are enlightened people, right? We are rational people. We are enlightened people. Many of us want to take the high road in this whole thing. We want to make sure that we don't return hate for hate.
Yeah.
That we're not guilty of what Fred Phelps was guilty of, just spewing venom and negativity, and, you know, dancing on the man's grave just does not seem healthy. It just doesn't seem like the proper response from a supposedly enlightened, rational culture. And, you know, we don't want to become guilty of doing what Fred Phelps himself did. Does that make any sense to you?
It makes perfect sense. And I would say that's exactly where I am on this. Is I want to allow for people to have their own emotions and their own express themselves the way they need to based on their own experiences with him. But I won't do it. I won't protest his funeral. I won't speak out with those kind of thoughts. I mean, you know, maybe I would have 20 years ago. I don't know. But I'm past that. And I think that it is more an expression of where you are as an individual as far as finding your own peace and your own sense of right and wrong, whether you will be aggressively destructive in this situation, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
In a previous show, you told your story, and anybody who wants to go back and archive can locate that and listen to it in depth. But we have a lot of new listeners to the show here in 2014. And I think we should take some time and go ahead and give another snapshot of how you grew up inside the Wesboro home and ultimately how you escaped. Can you once again kind of paint that picture for us?
Yeah. The environment there was very rigid. It was, you know, it was Calvinism is the root of his theology. He was a brilliant man. He was also a very violent man. And he expressed that violence both physically and verbally to his wife and to his children, and held them firmly in place with that violence as well as the theology that he taught us. So by the time we were teenagers, we understood that we were worthless sinners, and the only hope we had for eternity was to somehow garner God's grace.
So this wasn't just for show then. I mean, the picket signs and all the talk of damnation and doom, this was a reality behind the Westboro walls as well?
Oh, absolutely. One of the funny things about their surfacing in 1991, when I started getting calls from reporters, the prevailing thought in my mind was, well, of course they are. This was just the latest iteration of that isolating, damning theology that he had been teaching. Well, he started that church in 1955. He was preaching the same kind of theology back as early as, I think, 1951. And they ended up doing an article. Time Magazine did an article on him because he got in trouble in Pasadena preaching that message. So, no, this has always been there.
It's very sinners in the hands of an angry God, turn or burn, a lot of hellfire and brimstone.
Yeah, oh yeah. And the funny thing about it, Seth, I don't want to go too far afield, but one of the things I remind people of when I'm speaking is, typically people think in terms of cults, they think of the extremists that have an ideology that's new and uniquely weird. But I remind people that, my father, he didn't concoct some bizarre new theology. He's just 250 years ahead of his time or behind his time. I don't know what to say. 250 years ago, his theology, this message that they're putting out there, was the mainstream message. So that's interesting to contemplate, Now,
those people who say, Fred Phelps doesn't represent my God. My God is a God of love.
Yeah.
My Bible is a good book. Fred Phelps doesn't represent me. He's doing it wrong. He's a counterfeit Christian. But actually, when you look at it, he's pretty spot on in representing the quote-unquote truth of Scripture.
That's right. Yeah, he's not ignoring those passages that Christian leaders have had to ignore as we move into a more humanist ideology, secular ideology as a society.
Lots of churches have sort of backed away from the whole hellfire thing.
Yeah.
What they call seeker-friendly churches. They're inviting and happy and warm and fuzzy, and there's not a lot of talk about damnation or punishment there.
Yeah, that's right. And yet there it is. One of the things that I find interesting, I was reading a paper. There was a gal, she's a philosopher from the University of Massachusetts, I think. Very bright. You could just tell by the way she talks. But when she went to an example of her justification for not being able to embrace the idea of the Christian God, she talked about the problem of evil. And the false assumption in her justification is she has accepted this omnibenevolent attribute that is assigned to the Christian God today. What a lot of these philosophers and these deep thinkers don't contemplate is that what if he isn't? What if he's not omnibenevolent? Suddenly the problem of evil isn't so hard to overcome,
For you, when did the seeds of doubt start to sprout? Right, when did you start thinking to yourself, it might be time to find the exit?
Well, it's so hard to know exactly when or how, but I just know that I was at odds with him from very early on. It was more of a passive. You couldn't really be aggressively at odds with that man without suffering. But even the passive version got me a lot of attention, a lot more violence.
Did Fred Phelps have any joy in his life at all? I'm just curious. Did he laugh? Did he enjoy a good joke? Did he express warmth and good humor ever? Or was it all just doom and gloom and being really stern?
Well, no, I can recall many times him bursting out laughing at something that struck him as funny. And he could be a epitome of the Southern gentleman. He was charismatic. He was intelligent. He was engaging. I would say that he got a lot out of the time he spent practicing law. It fit him so well, his mind. But he took this all very seriously, and his primary focus in life, once he had that call of grace or whatever you want to call it when he was 17, he went straight into this, down this path that, in my opinion, can only lead to what we see here. If you are consistent and conscientious about maintaining those kind of doctrines, the doctrine of absolute predestination will lead you to madness if you embrace it completely.
Talking here with Nathen Phelps. Nate, have you ever seen the movie Red State?
I did, yeah. In fact, Kevin Smith brought it here to Calgary, and I got to watch it and then talk to him afterwards.
Well, the film has this sort of haunting depiction of a Westboro-type cult, and Michael Parks plays the patriarch. He's sort of the Fred Phelps of that particular story.
Yeah.
Now, I'm watching the movie, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I wonder how close is this? How close is this sort of in tone to what Wesboro really is? And if Nate's watching this, how much of this stuff rings true to him? How close was it?
Yeah, honestly, Seth, it was kind of weak.
It was weak?
Yeah, it really was. It was, don't get me wrong. I thought Parks did a masterful job, but you have to have stared into the eyes of madness to understand what I'm getting at there. I mean, he did a good job of trying to fill that role, but when I would watch my old man and the spit flying from his mouth and the blood suffused in his face and the raging eyes, the image that comes to my mind more often than not when my father was in full bloom is this mural that's painted on the wall of the Topeka Capitol building of the abolitionist John Brown. I would encourage people to look that up. I think it was done by an artist named Curry, but if you just say John Brown, Topeka Capitol, take a look at that picture. He's just this crazed man with a Bible in one hand and his eyes are wild, his hair is wild, and that's how I saw my father growing up.
All right, so you're 16, 17 and a half, pushing 18, right? You're almost legal. Are you at that time planning your exit?
Yeah, I was just 16. Mark had left. I had accepted my father's sentence of who I was and what my life was going to be like. And I made the deliberate, conscious decision that I was going to die and go to hell, but by God, I was going to live my life for the next 42 years or until I was 42. And then I'd deal with it when Christ returned. So
you guys really thought that this was it then? These were the last days. We were living in the end times. Oh, yeah. But we were pretty confident that the oldest this earth would get was 2012. When I left there, that was the time frame I was living with. My favorite part of your story, I think, is when you're watching the clock approaching midnight and your 18th birthday. And I'm not going to do the story a disservice by attempting to tell it for you here. I've got you on the line. I want you to paint that picture of that moment when you were preparing to make your escape. Well, okay, so I had bought this old Nash Rambler. I don't know if folks will know what that is. It's an old Rambler Classic, was a car line for a while, and I had bought it for $300. I had it stashed away, kept it hidden from everyone, and had slowly packed what few belongings I had, and I hid them in our garage. And then on the night of my 18th birthday, when it was about 10:30 around there, that everyone had settled down and the place got quiet. And I got dressed and went out, walked to the car, which was 2 or 3 blocks away, drove it back to the garage, backed it in the driveway, and opened the garage door, put everything in the trunk, and then pulled the car just back out onto the street, just in case someone happened along. They wouldn't know that it had anything to do with me, right? And then I went into the house, and our dining room was broken up by a set of stairs that went up into the upper floor where my father's room was. And from the bottom of those stairs, I could look to the left, and above we had like 3 refrigerators and a freezer lining the wall there. There was a clock above them. And then to the right was one of the doors out into the church, the sanctuary of the church. And from that angle, you could see the pulpit that he had preached at. And I stood there and I thought about that history that I'd had there, listening to him preach doctrines of hate. And I remember backing around the table. It was just to the left of me, I don't know, countless times, with him coming at me with a Maddox candle. And then I watched the clock, and I watched it slowly turn up to midnight, and I turned around and walked out. Your heart must be going 1,000 miles an hour. I mean, do you have any savings? Do you have any place to sleep? Do you have a plan? Seth, I had done absolutely no planning at all. The objective was to escape. I take that back. I had talked to a friend of mine who
ran a gas station just next to the high school I attended. And he had agreed to let me sleep in the bathroom of the gas station if I needed to. So I stayed there for the first, I think I was there 3 nights. And then my brother got wind of me leaving, and his mother-in-law reached out and offered me a place to stay. I had made no plans. It was all about getting out. I wasn't the brightest, but I was determined.
Nate, how many siblings total busted out of there? How many of your brothers and sisters got free of all this madness?
Well, in the end, 3 of us did out of the 13. But what a lot of people don't realize is that most of them, in fact, all of my siblings down to Elizabeth, so 8 of them actually had left, then went back because of their fear of the consequences.
It's almost like a battered partner thing, isn't it? I just can't leave him. I love him so much. He knows what's best for me. I just can't leave.
Yeah, and another component of it, I think, Seth, is that there's, we're taught that if we leave, that we're being delivered to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. So we go out there and we think that any minute God's going to strike us, and then something bad happens in your life, which happens. Everybody experiences bad things in their lives, right? It's just how it's interpreted when it happens. And we were taught to interpret it as God's punishment. So the best thing to do at that point is to get somewhere fast that's going to make you safe again.
I've talked to a lot of people, Nate, who have escaped cults. And many of those people were tremendously isolated. And when they finally busted out, integrating into culture, things like television and books, media, the internet, that kind of thing, all this was a shock. Were you and your brothers and sisters hugely sheltered because of your dad's control?
We were and we weren't. He was so effective at controlling us. And I don't know if it was deliberate or if it was out of ignorance on his part. He put us out there in the world. I talk about when we were selling candy, and we were going into bars on Fridays and Saturday nights selling candy to drunks, and strippers are performing right there in full view. We were ready for the world. We understood the world, but we were still extremely, I don't want to say naive as much as fearful of certain aspects of life. Like, of course, there was no dating, so you didn't really ever have an opportunity to develop any kind of understanding of the opposite sex. So, I always just felt very naive about all that, once I had left. And then there's some things that you don't realize until years later that you really are still profoundly conservative about. Not because you ever thought about it, but because that was the default message that you're living with, right?
Now, what year did you leave Wesboro? How long's it been?
It was 76.
Do you speak to your father at all? Have you had any person-to-person contact over the decades?
No, just one time real briefly on a radio program, and it was ugly. Lasted about 30 seconds.
They had you both on the air at the same time?
Well, it was an accident. He was on. This was in 95, and it was like 11 o'clock at night, and I'd been working late, was heading home. I assumed it was a replay because it was so late at night. So I had called the radio station to talk to the talk show host to see, just tell him who I was and ask him his thoughts. And it turns out it was live. And he said, "Do you want to ask him a question?" Of course, the last thing in the world I wanted to do was talk to him. But I said, "Okay, I'll be brave." And so I asked him a question about the verse in Romans, I think it's Romans 2:1. And he went after me, so I kind of got aggressive back, and then he started calling me names. And so the guy cut him off.
So if somebody was to go to Fred Phelps and mention your name, what's his opinion of you? What's his position? What's his attitude toward the son who left?
Well, probably the best way to answer that is I was in Clayton, Missouri, about to give a talk at a high school there. I had been invited by the Gay Street, the GSA club there. And there were 2 or 3 reporters there, and I was doing some interviews, and in the back of the auditorium. And this one fella that was from a paper there, and it's a suburb of St. Louis. And he had just recently spent 2 or 3 weeks with my family. So he was asking some pretty tough questions. And when he couldn't, well, I mean, I don't know what his motivations were, but he was asking some tough questions. And then he just stopped and he looked at me and says, you know, your family really, really hates you. And, you know, what do you say? What can I say to that? It is what it is. But I think that answers your question about as well as I can.
What do you do for family? You know, you don't have Fred, you don't have Shirley, and you wouldn't align with them even if you could have contact. And if you leave a family, in many ways, it leaves a vacuum in your life. And you fill that vacuum with what?
Well, I was married for 23 years. I lived in Southern California for 25 years. Had 3 of my own children, raised a 4th one. Had a tremendous support group around me. Interestingly enough, from a lot of them from the Evangelical Free Church that I attended at the time. And there was a lot of conversation when I would talk about this stuff with close friends about, you know, we don't pick our blood family, but we can pick the people that we call family. So there was that concept that I kind of embraced and used to fill my life. It never really is the same thing, though. But it's a pretty good substitute.
As your father is on his deathbed, you have been denied access to him?
Yeah. Yeah, they have made it impossible for anybody who wants to see him that has left to get in there and see him.
Would you go? I mean, if they said, fine, you got 15 minutes. We set the rules, but you can come in and say your goodbyes. Would you go?
I don't think so, Seth. But I would go back there and I would fight to make sure that my nieces and nephews and my sister who wants to see him has a chance to do that.
To give the opportunity for the children to decide for themselves how they would like to say goodbye.
That's right. I think it's just another example of their cruelty that they're taking this position.
Is Shirley Phelps running the show up there or what?
No, she was, I think that what led to Fred being excommunicated, Shirley was also a victim of that, whatever you want to call it, coup. But they have developed an elder board of 8 men, and part of that maneuver required that they get Shirley under control and make sure she understood that she was a woman and had no authority or right to assert herself.
Well, I'm thinking with 40 to 50 total people in the compound, a board of 8 is almost a quarter of the total people there.
That's right. And as I understand it from talking to my niece, it used to be that it was generally the members of the church. It was a fairly liberal arrangement that there had to be agreement amongst all of them before they would make a move or make a change in things. And then that shifted a couple of years ago. And that's when I started noticing Shirley was quieter. Didn't see so much of her. You saw more of Steve Drain and my brother Tim. And now apparently there was contention between my father and that elder board that led to him being excommunicated.
Yeah, I saw a lot of speculation in the media about his excommunication. And, there's not a lot of detail. I figured it was just politics.
Yeah, I think it is just politics. It's a power play, and he lost. And they've removed him from the building that he lived in since 1955 and supposedly have had people watching over him to make sure he didn't hurt himself. But then he stopped eating and drinking, and that, his health went down, and that's what has moved him into this hospice house.
Well, he's 84 years old, so you think he's just decided to punch his own ticket? This is his way of sort of going out on his own terms?
Yeah, I guess so. There's a big vacuum of information there. I did talk for about an hour with one of my nieces who had the opportunity to get in and see him. Actually, 2 of them went together, and that's the reason they've slammed the door, because they found out that they had slipped in and saw him. Their portrayal of that meeting was that he was soft and gentle and kind to him, that he was in and out of lucidity, clearly signs of some form of dementia, and very, very weak.
I've been criticized from a lot of people for drawing attention to Fred Phelps and his story. Why are you giving this guy the time of day? Notoriety is what he craves. Just ignore the man. And my response to them has been that Fred Phelps is already a household name. He's known worldwide. Now, we can either ignore the elephant in the room or we can address it. We can talk about it. I mean, have you heard similar things, Nate, from people saying, hey, this is a mistake to give this guy any more attention?
Yeah, and I'm with you on that, Seth. That's magic thinking. It's not going to happen. So what's the next option? I'm not even sure, but I'll give them the argument that it's best if we ignored him. I don't know if I agree with that or not. But the problem is you can't ignore him. It's not going to happen. So now you have to say, okay, what's the best response if in a situation where we can't ignore it? And like you said, we have to address it and deal with it responsibly.
I hear the same charge in regard to apologists and religious arguments sometimes. Ignore those things. Ignore them, they'll go away. Don't give them credibility. Don't give them the time of day. Attention is what they seek. The problem is, if we don't say anything, if we don't make counter claims with evidence to the claims made by these religious entities and people, they're so well funded, they're so well organized, they just steamroll over everybody and everything. We can't pretend they don't exist. Silence is not a solution if we're going to stop the damage done by religion.
Sure. And then you end up with the kind of circumstances we've seen throughout the history of religion, specifically Christianity, that they become too powerful. They become de facto truth. And it just becomes that much harder to say, wait a minute, there might be a better way than this, right?
You've spent a lot of time as an LGBT activist, a human rights advocate, right? When I saw your story, when I saw the speech of you speaking at Imagine No Religion in Kamloops years ago, when I knew you were going to be at some of the events that I was going to be at, I was looking for the opportunity to just sort of find you and shake your hand because you're positive. It's obvious that you love people and you have been a champion for human rights. I mean, are you sort of compensating for what your dad's doing when you're out there in the LGBT community? Is this your way of countering the Westboro damage?
Well, I know that early on, I looked at this practically and I said, look, I didn't do anything to create this platform that I have. But here it is, and I'm in a unique position that not very many people get. And what am I going to do with it? And it just seemed obvious to me that that's the victims of my family are the LGBT community. That's the topic that I should be focusing on because I obviously disagree with their position. And I think that, of course, the more I get into it, the more righteously indignant I got about the utter ignorance of the position.
I wasn't raised in a radical upbringing. I mean, it's basic Protestant Christian home, but I look back and I see how sexuality, specifically the issue of non-heterosexuality, was sort of crammed into this biblical cookie cutter. Said this is what sex is supposed to look like and all this other stuff, well, this is perverse, this is of the devil, you should fear this. Don't get too close to this, you might get infected, kind of a thing. And it's really tragic how our own ignorance about such an important subject affected how we treated people.
Yeah, I got a story about that sometimes, I'll tell you, because it's just so funny when I think about it. But yeah.
Oh, you can't tell me on the air? You got to tell me off the air or what?
I can tell you on the air. I'll make it quick. So we had set up a protest. We'd gotten signs, and there were about 20 of us downtown Calgary at the Bangladesh Council. You recall a while back that there was the atheists were being persecuted there. I don't remember the specifics of it now, but that's why we were out there, and we were having a great time. And this young fella comes walking up. You could tell he was he had had a few, and he was very friendly. And he comes up and says, "Hey, can I carry one of the signs?" And so someone handed him a sign, and he stands out there for about 10 minutes. And all of a sudden, I look up, and he's walking towards 3 or 4 of us, and he's got this. I mean, he was a black fella, and I swear to God, he'd turned white. He was visibly shaken. He says, "Are you guys atheists?" I said, "Well, yeah, we are." He goes, "Oh my God, it's like he started shaking and he threw the sign. He said, I can't do this. I can't do this. And he goes running off down the street. And I was telling my fiance about it. Said, I bet you that lad quit drinking after that. But it's that idea. Hey, he was absolutely terrified that he had just shaken hands with the devil, because we hold these ideas in our head and we never challenge them. And we treat people horribly because of that.
Are you a proud atheist, Nate?
I am. What I am is I'm a proud humanist. Atheism says what I don't accept. Humanism says what I do. But atheist is the term that polarizes people right now. So I will wear it with pride.
I think it's a term that's healthy for people to hear. But I understand exactly what you're talking about. You know, when I named the Thinking Atheist website and radio podcast, I did it because I wanted to encourage thinking. You know, we reject faith as a way of living. We want to embrace thinking, critical thought, reasoning, intellect. And, you know, in our culture where we came from, faith was this get out of jail free card. Now, he's a man of faith is a tremendous compliment if you're in the church. And now that you and I are looking through the looking glass the other way, it's kind of pathetic. You know, oh, he's a man of faith, meaning he accepts something without having any evidence. It's a lousy way to pattern one's life. And it's such a contrast to what we were once taught. We used to pray for faith. Please, God, give me a stronger faith.
Yeah, it was one of the big three: faith, hope, and love, right? And I'm going to now call it for what it is and tell people it's not a virtue. It absolutely isn't. It's a crutch. Faith is not a thing to desire. And that concept is utterly alien to most people. It's you know, they gasp audibly when they hear that kind of talk. Here's the thing that the thought keeps coming back to me, and I want to make the point, because in the United States, we congratulate ourselves daily, hourly, that we are the leaders of democracy and human rights and justice in the world. And our greatest honor is this document that we supposedly live by. And that document says that we have no right to create classes of people and to give one group more rights than another group. And when you start looking at how we behaved over the years, you know, we were taught that in school, the Constitution, you know, this is one of the greatest ideological writings in the history of man, and it's ours. And look at us. And I'm saying, let's act like it. And we haven't acted like it ever in the 200 and some years that this country's existed. We continue to fight bitterly every step of the way when someone says, well, if you believe it, act like it. And that's what we're saying right now with the LGBT community. If any country in this world has an obligation to remove those restraints, the United States has that obligation.
I know you said there was a board of directors, but in many ways, Fred Phelps, even though he's not with the church, is still kind of the franchise player of Wesboro. He's the name that is associated most closely with it. So with his passing, what becomes of Wesboro after that? I mean, you have a theory. Will there be a Westboro in the future? More importantly, how do we get these people to go away?
You know, the fact that they have taken these steps, moved this direction, are engaged in this power play, says that they intend to try to keep it going after he's gone. But I cling to the idea that as more and more of these young people leave, much like Dawkins talks about a tipping point for the control of religion in America, I think there will be a tipping point. I hope there will, when my siblings will say enough is enough, and they will feel freer now with him gone to say, I'm not going to keep paying this price of losing my children. That's my fantasy. There's absolutely no way to predict for sure what will happen, though, Seth.
If you'll indulge me, I want to read from the blog that I posted on the Thinking Atheist website and on the social media pages to sort of cap this show. It said this: Nathen Phelps just made a sobering Facebook post about his father, Fred Phelps, who is in hospice and near death. As Nate and the other free siblings are being barred from seeing their father in his final hours, it would seem that the tragedy of Fred's life will ripple out to his death, marked by isolation, division, and pain. A Westboro way of living, a Westboro way of dying. In many ways, Nate has been mourning his father since the day he turned 18 and escaped the Wesboro home to freedom. He mourns the strong, loving family unit he never had. He grieves for those who remain locked inside the halls of hate. And he sees the wasted potential of a natural leader who might have accomplished so many wonderful things had he not been poisoned in his mind and heart. If Fred Phelps has any legacy worth celebrating, it is the life of Nathen Phelps, a son who refused to echo his father's voice and spoke in his own, and who has dedicated his own life to countering the Westboro rage, to promoting love over hate, and to fighting for human rights. From one perspective, Nate lost a family, but in other ways he gained a family. To the people of this community and so many others, he is the brother, the son, the father, the friend. He is our family, and we are his. Well, Nate, I hope that those words provide encouragement to you during this time, and I know for a fact there are a ton of people in free thought communities all around the world who are there to support you and thinking about you in this difficult time. I hope you feel that.
Yeah, I do. I think that's just brilliant, Seth. I appreciate what you wrote.
Well, just remember that we're all in your corner, and you're in our thoughts, and you have our best in the days and weeks ahead. Take care, my friend.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks very much, Seth.
That is, again, the recorded conversation between myself and Nathen Phelps from 2 days ago, March the 18th. As we did the podcast for next week a few days early, we're taking next week off. Back on Tuesday, April the 1st. I will see you next month right here on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.